Right, as to the state's motion to restrict the audio feed of the four witnesses, all of whom were minors at the time, 2 have since turned 18 years of age, I'm going to deny that motion with one exception. So essentially, their testimony will be allowed by audio. As to all 4, I'm going to allow them to, after they receive the oath, to state and spell their names, but off of the audio feed. So that will not go beyond this courtroom. Much as we dealt with jurors who were discussing private matters during jury selection. They may be referred to by first names by other witnesses. That's fine. So essentially, my order as far as audio is the same as previously ordered, with one exception, that being their names will be given and spelled in the courtroom, publicly, on the record, but without the audio feed going out. As to video, I am going to, even though 2 are technically 18, given their young age, I'm going to continue to suppress the video for those minors as well, all of whom object. At least that's my understanding. Is that correct?
That's correct, Your Honor.
All right. All 4 of those witnesses do object to video, and thus I know technically the 2 are now adults, and Ms. Walker is, I'm sure, very correct that people will be able to figure out who these people are. But in order to give them, this is more to give them comfort at testifying as witnesses in what is a very high-profile trial. And given their young age, I am going to grant it as far as these 4 witnesses, but no others. So no video at all, audio as previously ordered, with the one modification that their names will be not given out over the audio feed. Now, having said that, media is present. They can report out the full name. I cannot impose a prior restraint on that. And so it is going to be said in a public courtroom. I would note that allowing the audio stream, despite their discomfort, when we compare to what we put, for example, a young criminal sexual conduct victim who has to testify about deeply traumatic and terrifying sexual abuse sitting in front of their abuser with the public present in a larger courtroom, I think we do unfortunately have to ask a lot of our witnesses, especially ones who are minors, who are victims, and who are victims of terrible trauma. These, on the other hand, are witnesses. They are not victims per se. I'm sure it had an effect on them, but they are not victims per se. They are bystanders testifying about what they saw happening to Mr. Floyd. So with that, any questions about the court's restrictions? All right, and we are going to have all 4 of them come one after the other. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, and for those 4, 1 requires a support person. Is that correct?
That's correct.
We have a second chair set up right next to the witness stand, and the TV feed will not include that support person. At most an elbow, but even then we're going to try and keep the camera shot very tight just on the witness. And for the minors, it's not going to be on at all, so it's not going to be a problem.
Very good.
The camera will be on the seal. Okay, I think, is there anything else? The jurors are starting to arrive, but I don't think we have a full complement yet. Anything else for the record?
Nothing from the state, Your Honor.
All right. The earliest we're going to be able to start is 9:15 if we have everybody, but let's 9:15 at the very earliest, probably 9:30. Thanks.
That's good. Test 1 2. Hi. Test 1 2. Check.
But there are four tube now?
No, I don't know what it was. It was been like I forget the number. And then the regular report the name. You can report it.
Okay.
But
Are you
they're
the
not gonna have that.
deputy that's here?
I'm one of them. There were two of us.
You good?
If anything else I need. I ate a little breakfast,
Thank you.
so I feel good about that.
Good.
I didn't wanna be hungry in here.
Yeah.
And,
Just make sure your phone's on silent.
yes,
Is it off of vibrate?
so who's the other reporter, you know?
He's like an independent reporter.
Oh, okay,
I think that's the church required.
okay. All right, well, I'm gonna just write some notes about
Yep.
what you just told me. And I don't know if I'm gonna type or use my handwritten self.
Sure.
And
And
is
I was
there a
saying,
pass?
where is Matt? Did Matt go upstairs?
He did. He should be back in a minute.
Okay. Alright. Well, we just wait down here for one.
Yeah, somebody.
No, I got you.
What?
Yeah.
Yep, okay.
Alright, there's no password required.
It says no internet. It's probably because I haven't tried to connect.
It's just Wi-Fi.
That noise? Yes, hi, Susie Jones. Susie, so nice to meet you. Nice to meet you too. Yeah, in person. Is there an internet that Henry County has, or do you have a Court TV internet?
I do have hotspot, but I can use them to keep you on the
Okay, I'm gonna try that.
It says like it's, HC underscore guest,
It's HC.
HC underscore guest.
Okay. There it is. Yep.
Yeah, alright, yeah,
Yep.
there's no password.
Okay. At least you have time to tell me what happened this morning, because I just got here. I didn't know.
Yeah, we got like the state's motion on
Good morning, members of the jury. I'm able to start a little early, so that's probably good. Morning, Mr. Williams. Just a reminder that you are still under oath, and Mr. Frank.
Morning again, Mr. Williams.
Good morning, man.
And yesterday, when we finished, we had a little abrupt end because of a question about the feed, and that's been worked out. So just to sort of revisit with you where we were when we left off yesterday, we had been going through that piece of video. You identified for the jurors things that you saw, particularly the shimmy moves that you saw. And so I want to move on then from that point and continue on with our questioning this morning, okay?
Correct.
All right. Now, while you were standing there watching this incident from the curb, were there things that you saw on Mr. Floyd's face that were significant to you?
Correct. Like I said before, you could see that he was going through tremendous pain, and you could see it in his face from the grunting. You could see his eyes slowly, rolling back in his head, and him having his mouth open, wide open, slowly with drool and slob and dryness on his mouth. And you can see that he's trying to, gasp for air, and trying to be able to breathe as he's down there, and trying to move his face, side to side so he can, I'm believing,
Okay.
I'm assuming gasp for more air there. I'm not.
Okay, and as you were standing there seeing all this, how were you feeling?
As I was sitting there, I just was really trying to keep my professionalismness and make sure that I speak out for Floyd's life, because I felt like he was in very much danger, and I seen another man like me, being controlled in a way where
Yeah, let me just,
this is.
Stop. That answers the question. We'll ask
Correct.
another question.
and were you scared for yourself?
Yes, I was totally scared for my safety and people around me, and that's.
And so,
Correct.
did you feel like you could intervene in the situation more than verbally, more than speaking?
Not as much, no. As much as I wanted to, my energy didn't let me, and I was controlled on the curb. So I did as much as I can.
Now, you at some point learned the name of the officer, Tao, who was standing there, correct?
Correct.
So you know when I ask about that, you know who I am referring to.
Correct.
And at some point, did you step off the curb and have an interaction with Officer Tao?
Yes, I did step off the curb and had an interaction with Officer Tao.
And what did Officer Tao do?
He proceeded to push his hand in my chest, swipe down, put my hands up, and I stepped back, put back on the curb.
And did you make any further moves towards Officer Tao?
No further moves.
At some point, did a person come up and identify herself as a Minneapolis firefighter?
That is correct.
Did you know her before that day?
No, I did not know.
And I think you said earlier she asked that they check his pulse.
That is correct.
And were there other than you and her, other bystanders on the sidewalk there?
Yes, there were other bystanders on the sidewalk.
Did you hear any of them threatening the safety of the police officers?
No, I did not.
And at some point, did you help, in fact, restrain some of those individuals?
Correct. Once the situation got a little intense with someone was going on behind me, I spoke to one of the gentlemen and told him that this is not the time or place for this right now, and then he proceeded to go back into the building.
So, did you know that individual?
No, I did not know the individual at all.
Did you, recognize him or know where he was from?
No, I did not.
At some point, did you ask him to go back in the store?
That is correct.
So you thought he had come from the store,
That is correct.
and after you told him to do that, what did he do?
He proceeded to go back in the store, and I believe he might have been escorted as he was crying back to the store.
So he never made another move towards the police officers?
That is correct.
Mr. Williams, the jury has heard some audio and video of this incident already when you were there, and you were using some pretty strong language.
That is correct.
You were raising your voice.
That is correct.
Why? Why for those, both of those?
For the fear of myself and fear of the people around me, and trying to just be able to talk to the officer and let him know that this should not happen. Just from being around different officers and working in that industry, I just never seen that, and I felt like I should speak on it, and I vocalized it.
What were the kind of emotions that were causing you to speak like that?
No feeling or no remorse or no response from the officer.
Hold on. Objection is
Non-responsive.
non-responsive is sustained. Jury will disregard the answer from the last question. If you could be a little more precise in framing your question, Mr. Frank, I think that would help.
I certainly could, Your Honor. The emotions that you were feeling that caused you to use this kind of language and that tone of voice.
Yeah, the emotion that caused me to use this language in this voice was non-responsive from the officer.
Non-responsive.
Sustained. Disregard the answer.
So let me ask you this way. Were there things that you were seeing about the officers that also caused you concern?
Correct.
And what was that?
The non-response from the officer.
Okay. So that was something that was also affecting how you were feeling about the incident.
That is correct.
And so then that led into part of why you were raising your voice and using the terms used.
That is correct.
Were you present when the ambulance arrived?
That is correct.
Now, at any time during this interaction, did you see Officer Chauvin take his knee off of Mr. Floyd's neck?
No.
Okay. When the ambulance arrived, did he do that?
No.
And did you see a paramedic, an ambulance personnel check for Mr. Floyd's pulse?
Repeat the question.
Yep. When the paramedics arrived, did you continue to watch when the paramedics got out of the ambulance and checked on Mr. Floyd?
Yes, I did watch.
Did you see if they checked for Mr. Floyd's pulse?
I believe that they were attempting to go check for the pulse, and the knee was he was still on top of him. Did he check the pulse? I cannot recollect. I don't remember if he was able to even check his pulse, but I remember that.
Objection, Your Honor. There's no question.
How do you answer there? It was responsive to that point.
I think you've
Next
answered
question.
the question. Thank you. Now, when the paramedics loaded Mr. Floyd into the ambulance, were you still there at the scene?
That is correct.
And after that happened, did you see what the officers did? Well, let me back you up a little bit. At some point, did you learn that there were more than those two officers at the scene?
That is correct.
When did you learn that?
Once the ambulance have arrived, I did notice that there was more than one officer, more than two officers on the scene.
And so where did you see, or how did you see these other officers?
Once they started to load Mr. Floyd onto the straddle, to not to know the technical name of it, but they put him onto the little bed thing. to.
The gurney or the stretcher?
The gurney, correct, yes, Your Honor, Matt.
And then when they did that, you saw these other officers?
Correct, that's right.
Where had they been, or where did they come from?
They were on the bottom side of Floyd, or trying to get his feet on to the gurney, and yeah.
Then you were able to see them?
Correct.
And after Mr. Floyd was put into the ambulance and the ambulance left, did you stay at the scene for a little while?
That is correct.
Okay, so right after the ambulance left, did you see where the officers went?
That is correct.
Where did they go?
They proceeded to cut to the other side, front of the store, which is 38th. Chicago's this way. So they proceeded to go towards 38th and proceed to go away from the scene.
And were you still in that same emotional mindset?
Yes, I was very lost at the moment, and I was very nervous and not knowing what to do. And yes.
And did you, in fact, stay around at the scene for a little while?
Yes, I did.
At some point, did you make a 911 call?
That is correct. I did call the police on the police.
Right. And why did you do that?
Because I believe I witnessed a murder,
And so you felt a need to call the police.
and I felt the need to call the police on the police.
Now, there were police there, right?
There were police there.
Okay, why didn't you just talk to them about it?
I believe that they didn't. We just didn't have no connection. You know, I spoke to them, but not on a connection of a human being relationship.
Did you, believe that they were involved?
Yes, totally.
And so when you made that 911 call, about how long after the ambulance left was that?
Time recollection, I don't know.
Was it a matter of minutes?
Minutes, seconds. Not too long after they retreated to the other side of the street, I proceeded to call the police.
And prior to today, have you had an opportunity to listen to a recording of that 911 call?
Can you please repeat that question?
Prior to coming to court today, did we play for you a copy of that 911 call, a recording of it?
I will not say yes or no. I cannot remember at this moment.
Okay. If you heard that today, would you be able to recognize it as the 911 call that you made?
That is correct.
We have now marked that as Exhibit 20, and, Your Honor, we would ask that it be, we are offering it now as Exhibit 20.
And 20 is received.
All right, so if we can at this point, then play Exhibit 20.
May 25, 2020.
911, what's the address of the emergency?
Officer 987 killed a citizen in front of a Chicago store. He just pretty much just killed this guy that wasn't resisting arrest. He had his knee on the dude's neck the whole time. Officer 987, the man went, stopped breathing. He wasn't resisting arrest or nothing. He was already in handcuffs. They pretty much just killed the dude. I don't even know if he's dead for sure, but he was not responsible when the ambulance just came and got him. And the officer that was just out here left, the one that actually just murdered the kid in front of everybody on 38th in Chicago.
Okay. Would you like to speak with the sergeant?
Yeah, like that was bogus what they just did
Hold
to
on.
this man. He was unresponsive. He wasn't resisting arrest or any of it.
Okay, let me get you over to the desk. You can request to speak with the sergeant, okay? Stay on the
Yeah, and I'm sitting here talking with another off-duty firefighter that just sat here watching in front of us as well.
Okay.
And she told him to check the man's pulse, but they wouldn't even check the pulse.
Okay, 1 second.
I have reached the city of Minneapolis to reach someone in our property crimes division.
Y'all murderers, bro. Y'all murderers. How you gonna kill yourself? I already know it. 2 more years. You gonna shoot yourself. Murderers, bro. Y'all niggas is murderers, bro. Minneapolis third precinct.
Hey, it's dispatch.
Yeah, man. So
Hold
I
on.
want to speak
Sir,
to a supervisor.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, he wants to speak with the supervisor relating to 320's call cup food.
But they just killed that man in front of the store. The police.
2033 46, May 25, 2020.
Is that then an accurate recording of the call you made?
That is correct.
And at the beginning, you referred to Officer 987. Where did you get that number from?
Honestly, it was just visually popped in my head.
Okay.
Like, I looked at his badge, and that's what I read on his badge.
And so whose badge, which officer were you referring to?
The officer sitting over there.
Okay. And was that also the officer that had his knee on George Floyd's neck?
That is correct.
And for the record, when your previous answer, you were pointing to the defendant, Mr. Chauvin?
That's correct.
And so the purpose in making, what was the purpose in making that 911 call at that time?
I just felt like that was the right thing to do. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know what to do. But
And-
call.
I'm sorry, I cut you off.
But call.
And the response then was to transfer you to a sergeant, correct?
That is correct.
And then at some point, the call, it sounds like you're talking to Officer Tao. Do you recall if you were actually talking to Officer Tao at that point?
That is correct. I was. Because I think at the moment, I don't think at the moment that I was making the call, he proceeded to like intimidate me and stick his camera in my face, his body cam. And
Okay. And the call sort of ends abruptly. Did you hang up and terminate the call?
I'm not 100% sure, but I may have because I felt threatened once our interaction happened in front of the store with me and Tao.
And then from there, after hanging up, did you stick around for a while and talk to some other people there?
Yeah, I wanted to do my own investigation.
Your Honor, I have no further questions.
Mr. Nelson?
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Can I ask what you're looking at?
Just notes, that's all.
Okay. I'm going to ask that you put those to the side, okay?
Cool, thanks.
All right. Thank you for your patience yesterday. Thank you for being here this morning. I just have some follow-up questions for you, all right?
Yep.
You testified yesterday that you started wrestling in the 7th grade. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And over time, you were talking about how you learn how to control your body weight, right?
That is correct.
And one of the things that you kind of talked about was when early in your instruction in wrestling, you call it, I think, flow wrestling.
That's correct.
And as I understand that, and correct me if I'm wrong, flow wrestling is kind of learning how to kind of keep your center of balance, learning how to, sometimes it may feel you should use your arm when you should really use your leg. Kind of just learning how your body works, right?
Yeah, correct. Less resistance.
Less resistance. So sometimes less resistance is actually better in certain circumstances.
Repeat that.
Sure. I mean, if you're on the mat, right, and your instinct is to push your arm out to the side to try to use your body weight to roll, you may want to actually use your leg to roll the other way, right? Kind of like flow.
Kind of, but not really.
Okay, how would you describe just the flow of wrestling?
Flow is less. Flow is more, I'm flowing with you without using my strength. I'm flowing with you going 50, 60% of it. I'm flowing with you, letting you get into a half Nelson, and you feel the happiness and you're in it, and now you're flowing. Your partner's letting you flow off your back and get into a position where you get into a stand up, into escape. Flow is where my partner's letting me get in on a double, and I'm letting him finish the double, and now I'm flowing into my offensive or my defensive position of getting away. So
Right.
it's different positioning.
Right, so you're learning how to use your body weight against the weight of the other person. You're learning how to just get in and out of moves, right?
Flowing.
Flowing, right. And that's something that you learned, at a young age in the sport of wrestling.
Correct.
And as you continued your wrestling career, you testified that you wrestled all the way through high school and then into college for a couple of years as well.
That is
right?
correct.
And you would agree that wrestling is a sport,
Wrestling's a lifestyle.
okay? There are rules, there are points, there are referees. So there's a sport to wrestling, right?
Correct.
And I understand as a wrestler, it's a lifestyle, right?
Yeah.
But to the kind of the casual observer, maybe it's just a sport, right?
Correct.
All right. But you're learning how to keep your center of gravity lower and grapple with people,
Correct.
right? And then you testified that after you kind of got out of college or finished your career in college, that you started moving more towards the mixed martial arts, right?
Correct.
And so you were training in jiu-jitsu, I believe you said?
That is correct.
All right. And again, jiu-jitsu is a form of martial arts, right?
Correct.
Lots of forms of martial arts, right?
Correct.
Judo, karate, Krav Maga, these are all various forms of martial arts that you have some general familiarity with, right?
Correct.
But your training is specifically in jiu-jitsu, correct?
No. I'm a martial artist. I train jiu-jitsu, Muay Thai, stick fighting like I'm a martial artist. I don't just train jiu-jitsu.
Okay.
I stay in boxing, wrestling, all is put into one. So as a fighter, you're not just working on the ground game. You're working on your stand-up. You're working, your Muay Thai, your kickboxing, things like that. That's what a martial artist is.
Okay. So you incorporate several forms of martial arts into what you study.
That is correct.
All right. And again, the notion of a chokehold is very common within the martial arts community, right?
That is correct. Submissions.
Submissions. And there are many forms, right?
Correct.
Like the triangle or the rear naked chokehold, all sorts of different types of chokeholds or submission holds that apply.
That is correct.
All right. And again, I understand that martial arts is a lifestyle, but there is a sport to it as well, right?
That competitive side too. Yeah, sports.
Right.
Correct.
And I'm just talking generally, I'm not talking about the MMA fighting yet, but just even as a martial artist, there are competitions with rules and referees and things of that nature.
That
right?
is correct.
All right. And whether you wrestle or you compete in the or in the martial arts, there are weight classes, right?
That is correct. Well, yeah, that's correct. MMA has weight classes. Jiu-jitsu tournaments, there's open weights. So, you win your weight division, you have a chance to wrestle in open division, which usually if I'm competing in a jiu-jitsu tournament, I'll do it in open division, which is open weight.
All right. So again, generally, like looking at your career as a wrestler, what weight did you wrestle at?
I wrestle anywhere from 106 to 141 in college.
Okay. And when you would competitively wrestle, you would wrestle with other people who were in that same weight class, right?
Correct.
And then in the martial arts, in the competitions for the martial arts, there are weight classes, but there's also this open weight class, right?
That's correct for jiu-jitsu.
In jiu-jitsu, and so you, as a 141-pound guy, may wrestle or may grapple with someone who's 180 pounds.
Or 220, 210.
Right, or 100.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
I mean, okay. But then about 10 years ago, you testified that you started with mixed martial arts.
Repeat that, please.
I believe that you testified yesterday that about 10 years ago, you began training in mixed martial arts.
Correct, martial arts.
Yep.
Yeah, with like tennis.
MMA.
MMA, mixed martial arts. Yeah.
All right. And maybe I'm confused, like, of your progression? So you go from wrestling to boxing to mixed martial arts?
So I went from wrestling in college to training in a martial arts school,
Okay.
which covers martial arts,
Okay.
Muay Thai, Jiu-Jitsu, boxing, mixed martial arts,
Okay.
wrestling.
And that's because there are some, I mean, again, there are some businesses or gyms that will train in a specific form of a martial art, right?
Correct. You have some that just do box. You have boxing gyms. You have jiu-jitsu gyms. You have Muay Thai gyms.
Or Krav Maga
Or
or
Krav,
whatever.
yeah, whatever, anything, stuff like that. You know, you have different specialty of martial arts for different schools. But some schools, one of the schools I was at, the Academy under Great Nelson, he taught a variety of martial arts. It was a martial arts school.
Okay. I'm understanding now that you went from the wrestling to the mixed martial arts. And about 10 years ago, was it that you started competing in a mixed martial arts?
I started competing right away. I went from wrestling in college to being one of the top amateur fighters in the Midwest to finish, just growing as a martial artist. So I started, at a different gym before I got to the academy. I was a wrestler. I didn't know anything but wrestling, at the time. So I'd take people down and ground and pound. And then I switched to gyms and under Greg, and I learned more jiu-jitsu. I learned more kicking. I learned different elbows. I learned, different martial arts techniques, chokes, submissions, arm bars, things like that, spinning back fists, flying knees. I learned that.
Right. Okay. When we talk about an MMA fight,
Correct.
right? All of those various methods of fighting are employed in those fights, right?
Correct.
So if I am a boxer and I'm in a boxing match, right? I can't kick you, for example.
No.
But if I'm in an MMA fight, I may punch you, I might kick you, I might choke you, short of biting, right?
Correct.
And the point of a mixed martial arts fight is to actually knock the person out, render him unconscious, right?
That is correct. Control the cage, things like that.
You referenced the cage match, right?
Yeah.
And that's what we kind of think about when we think about mixed martial arts fights.
You got cage fighting, which you see UFC, Bellator, LFA, all things like that, and then you have martial art tournaments where it's just strictly jiu-jitsu. You're in your gi. You have blue belts, black belts, white belts, purple belts. They all compete at a level. No striking, just all grappling. Then you have like the ones that are us in the cage. We do everything: punch, kick, all that stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
And I believe, according to your professional record, because you had an amateur career, and then you had a professional career, right?
Correct.
And you had 11 professional fights?
Possibly. I don't even know how many fights I technically had. So.
Yeah. Well, you know the internet exists, right?
Yeah.
You know your statistics are saved.
Yeah.
All right. And so if I say that your professional record was 5 wins, 6 losses in 11 fights, would you disagree with that?
But I think I might be 66.
Okay.
I think I'm actually 66.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when you fight in an MMA fight, in these kind of open freestyle fights, you fight in a weight class, right?
Correct.
All right. People who are similar in terms of their weight, they may be taller, they may be shorter, but they're in the same weight class.
Correct.
Right. Okay. And again, I mean, there's a referee, right?
Correct.
And certain fights, when you get someone into a submission hold, the referee may come and lift up the person's arm to see if they're conscious or unconscious, right?
That's correct.
That's a way of determining whether or not the
That's if
fight
they're
is
not moving. I mean, that's if they're not moving, if they're not fighting and stuff like that. Yeah, the referee has to make sure that the person is conscious. So he might say, keep moving. If they're not moving, he might check, and sometimes the opponent will know that person's out. So the opponent, if you look at the ref, like, look, he's out, he's out, things like that.
And sometimes you don't know that they're out, and that's why the ref comes and picks up the arm, right?
Most opponents know when they put their person out.
But it's possible, right? It's a yes or no question.
It's possible.
All right.
How about that?
As a part of your training in the mixed martial arts, you voluntarily submitted to being put into chokeholds, correct?
At practice.
At practice, right. And you also practiced these moves, right?
That's correct.
Rendering other people in practice unconscious.
That's
right?
correct.
And in your professional career, you were also, at times, have rendered people unconscious and been rendered unconscious yourself.
Correct.
Through one of these chokeholds.
Correct.
All right. Now, you described these chokeholds generally yesterday. These chokeholds, like you described an air choke and a blood choke.
Correct.
You remember your conversation about that yesterday?
Yes, correct.
All right. So when you use these forms of chokeholds, whether it's an air choke or a blood choke, they use those in various forms of martial arts, right? Like judo, Krav Maga. A chokehold is sort of across the board in terms of martial arts,
Correct.
with the exception of maybe the stick fighting, right?
Correct.
All right. And you testified that you, at your academy, you train with a lot of law enforcement officers, military people, and law enforcement from both state and federal levels, right?
That is correct.
And you said sometimes you don't even know that that's what they do, right?
That's correct, depending on what level.
And sometimes you get to know these guys because you're fighting with them, right?
Yeah.
You're training with them, and they tell you a little bit about their lives, right?
Yeah, sometimes, I mean, we just build a brotherhood of the gym. You know, some people interact outside with personal life. Some people just interact in the gyms, you know, and build a relationship. So I see you on an everyday basis. Like at work, I go in, I see you every day. I interact with you there. Then I'm going to interact with you outside of work, you know.
Right.
And then
Okay.
there's some that I interact with outside of
Okay.
the gym.
But I just want to make sure, you've never officially been invited to go to like the Minneapolis Police Academy to train law enforcement in the use of the force
No.
or the use of these chokeholds?
No.
And or any other police academy for that reason?
No, I witnessed my sensei, Greg Nelson.
I'm asking about you, sir. Have you ever officially been asked to train police officers specifically in the use of chokeholds?
No, just witnessed it.
Okay. Now, air chokes. You described air chokes yesterday. Air chokes are from the front, correct?
Correct.
And that's because what you're doing is you're actually cutting off the air
Correct.
to the trachea,
Correct.
right? So you can render someone unconscious by coming from the front of the neck and cutting off their airway, which renders them unconscious.
Repeat that.
Sure. An air choke is a front choke, agreed?
Yep.
And what you're doing in an air choke is you're cutting off the air supply or the oxygen supply from the front of the neck, correct?
Correct.
And in doing so, you can render a person unconscious, correct?
On an air choke, I'm not a medical person, so I won't answer that.
Okay? On a blood choke, right, what you're doing is you're cutting off, and you described yesterday, the blood supply to the brain, right?
Okay. Side choke. Correct.
A side choke. And you described several different types of chokeholds, like the rear naked chokehold, I think it's called, or the triangle. What you're doing is you're actually cutting off the blood supply to both sides of the neck in those.
Repeat that.
When you do a blood choke, what you're trained on generally is to limit the blood supply to both sides of the neck.
No, a blood choke is attack one side of the neck.
It's just one side of the neck. Okay?
The blood choke is attack the side of a neck. So my choke's from here, side of the neck.
Right, but you're using your weight and you're actually cutting off both sides. You're using your body and your arm, right? And you're actually protecting the trachea or the airway in the crux of your.
You're mixing chokes up. So you're mixing your air chokes and your blood chokes together. Air choke is to attack the trachea. A side choke is to attack the side of the neck.
So if I have someone in a chokehold, right, and a blood chokehold using my arm, I may have my hand behind that person, right? No?
It's not, I'm attacking the side of the neck, not the trachea. You're attacking the trachea, I'm attacking the side choke.
I'm saying that the trachea is protected by the crux of the elbow. And so you're using the forearm and the bicep to cut off both sides of the blood.
Correct, from here to here, right. You're cutting off one side of the neck on the choke.
Okay. How long does that usually take in your experience to render someone unconscious?
You go unconscious on a blood choke within seconds. Some people don't even know that they're about to go unconscious.
Right. You were interviewed by the FBI, right?
That is correct.
Right. I believe it was Agent Garvey of the FBI, right? Are you looking at some notes to refresh your recollection?
I have it in front of me. That's correct.
Would that help? Would that help you refresh your recollection?
I mean, yeah, that's why I just opened it up.
Yeah.
That's correct.
It's kind of weird. We have rules in court. You have to testify from your memory, not your notes. But if you
It's
need
not
to,
notes. I'm just the name is on the front of the page.
what I'm saying is, if you need to refer to your whatever it is you have in front of you to help you refresh your recollection, we need to get permission from the court to do that. So it's a weird procedure that we
I
have
don't
to
know his name, so I looked to see what his name was.
Okay.
Correct.
Would it help you remember his or her name if you looked at your paper in front of you?
That's correct, because it's in the paper, same paper. you
Your
have.
Honor, may he refer his notes?
And Mr. Williams, refer to your notes silently,
Correct.
and once it's refreshed your memory, then close the notes back up and testify
Correct.
from your memory.
Yeah, definitely.
Mr. Nelson.
Thank you.
What was the name one more time, sir?
I believe there were two agents there, right? One was from the BCA named Angela Garvey,
That one's correct.
and then Eckert is the last name of the other?
I believe that, yep, that is correct.
Okay. And you were interviewed by those agents on May the 29th of last year, correct?
Correct, I believe so.
All right. You wouldn't, we have a transcript of that statement and the reports about it.
Yeah.
Would you dispute me if I told you it was May 29th?
I don't recollect the dates.
Okay, fair enough. And do you recall them asking you about blood chokes and how long it takes to choke someone out?
Correct.
And you told them 3 to 5 seconds.
Correct, just like I just told you, within seconds.
Right. And an MMA round is 3 minutes, right?
No, that's for amateurs. MMA round is 5-minute rounds.
Okay.
3 minutes for amateurs, 5 minutes for pros.
All right. So 3 to 5 minutes are per round of an MMA fight.
Of an MMA fighter.
Right. Okay. Have you ever, whether it be in your training after you have rendered someone unconscious, where they come back to and they start fighting again?
Inside of a fight?
Mhm.
Have I choked someone out and they came back to? No.
Okay.
Like, finished fighting, the referee will.
Have you seen that happen in practice?
Rephrase it, or
So
please
some-
repeat the
so-
question.
I will do so. Well, you rendered someone unconscious, right? You're fighting with them, they've gone unconscious, you've released your chokehold from them. Have you ever experienced someone coming back and starting to fight you again right away?
Yes, and personally, no. Have I seen it? Yes.
Okay, fair enough. So you've seen after someone is unconscious, they come back to consciousness and they start fighting right away again. You've seen that happen.
I've seen it on the UFC multiple times where when someone gets choked out, they come back to and they continue to try to fight, and the referee has to explain to them that they've been unconscious. I've been knocked out, and I had to come back conscious, and the first thing I wanted to do was continue to fight. And then when I was in the locker room, they told me that the fight was already over, so I have no recollections of what happened in that moment.
Okay, great. Now, you testified that one of the things that you do and have done in your career is to work as a security guard, right?
That is correct.
And you've worked as a security guard in a variety of contexts, right?
That's correct.
So you've done some personal security for people,
Correct.
and you've done some like kind of doorman stuff, right?
That's correct.
Bouncing, I guess, is what
Correct.
you would call it. And you said that you have worked alongside the Minneapolis Police Department in those club-type situations with off-duty officers and on-duty officers.
That is correct.
Okay. The, in that capacity, have you ever had to deal with a crowd of people?
That is correct.
Have you ever had to deal with a crowd of people that was upset?
Definitely.
Is it easier or harder to deal with a crowd that is upset?
Each person is different. Me, I'm able to deal with the high capacity of distractions, different things going on, and still be able to be professional and focus on what's going on in front of me.
Okay. And have you ever been involved in a situation where there's a crowd that's upset and you were afraid of them?
Correct.
I'd like to direct your attention to the incident on May 25th of 2020 that you've testified about. You were shown an exhibit yesterday that shows that you arrived at the Cup Foods on the 38th Street side of Cup Foods at 8:23 and 12 seconds.
Don't recollect the time, sir.
Okay. Would you like me to show you that exhibit, or would you agree that that's probably correct? I can show you the
Yes,
exhibit.
show me exhibit.
All right. I am showing you Exhibit 18. Yeah, you can see that?
Yeah, correct.
This was already admitted into evidence yesterday. You would agree that Exhibit 18 shows you walking along 38th Street on May 25th, 2020 at 8:23 and 12 seconds.
Correct.
Okay. So, I'm not trying to trick you, all right?
That's fine.
All right. And it's fair to say that prior to your arrival there, you had no idea what had been going on in the area.
No, not at all. Like I said, I just seen squad cars and didn't know what was going on.
Right. And you testified that as you kind of came around the corner, your energy sort of pulled you towards that incident, right?
Yeah, that's totally correct.
So you would have absolutely no idea that an ambulance was called 3 minutes before you arrived.
Don't know anything about that.
You would have had no idea that an ambulance was stepped up to code 3, which means get here quick, 2 minutes before you arrived.
No recollections of any of that.
You weren't there, you wouldn't possibly know, right?
Wouldn't know at all.
You testified that, kind of based on your experience as a security guard, your first inclination is to just sort of observe everything that's going on, right?
Totally correct.
And that's what you did.
That's why I felt like I did correct.
So it's fair to say that you had not observed any prior contact between the Minneapolis Police Department and Mr. Floyd.
Only what I seen.
You would have no idea that they had been dealing with him for 15 minutes prior to your arrival.
Objection, Your Honor.
Not mine.
No, right?
He can still answer that question?
You can still answer it.
Oh,
Would you like me to state it again?
repeat that question.
Sure. You were not aware that the police had been dealing with Mr. Floyd for 15 minutes prior to your arrival.
Not at all.
Now, you testified that as you were observing Mr. Floyd on the ground, you observed blood coming from his nose or mouth area, right?
Correct, and someone actually stated that if you watch the video.
Right, I've watched the video. But you would not have been aware that 3 minutes prior to your arrival, an ambulance was called specifically because he was bleeding from the mouth.
That had nothing to do with me, sir.
But you made certain assumptions.
What was your answer again?
I didn't have nothing, recollections of that, nothing to do with me.
Sometimes the court reporter can't hear, so that's the only reason for this.
No, Your Honor, appreciate you, man.
Okay,
Yes,
Mr.
sir.
Nelson.
Thank you. But you yesterday testified that you assumed that the blood coming from Mr. Floyd's nose and mouth area was from his face being pushed into the cement.
I didn't say that. I don't, can you, yeah.
There's no question.
Yeah.
You answered my question.
Right, his blood coming through his nose. I said blood's coming through his nose. I didn't say how I got there or where.
I'm
it
going
came
to
from.
ask you, that's non-responsive objection. You've answered my question, sir.
All right.
Stop. Objection is sustained. Jury disregard the last remark that was not in response to a question. Mr. Nelson.
Thank you. You testified that after the ambulance came, you saw 2 additional officers, right?
Correct.
And you, prior to that happening, had no idea that those 2 officers were back there, right?
Correct.
So it's fair to assume that you did not hear any of the conversations between the officers, correct?
Child didn't let me get close enough. Correct.
Right. The question is, did you hear any of the conversations between the officers? Yes or no?
Please repeat that because you said it different the first time.
Sure. Did you hear any of the conversation occurring between the 3 officers with Mr. Floyd? Yes or no?
No.
It's fair to say that as you were there, you grew angrier.
Correct. That's what you perceive.
Pardon?
I said, is that what you took from the video? Correct.
As you were there and interacting with Officer Tao and Officer Chauvin, you grew more and more upset. Would you agree with that?
Correct.
You grew angry, right?
I grew control and professionalism.
Okay. Again, you made a statement to Agents Garvey and Eckert and in that statement you said,
Your Honor, I'm going to object to this form of cross-examination.
Overruled.
Which one, Your Honor?
Overruled. Proceed.
Proceed.
in that statement you said, like, I really wanted to beat the shit out of the police officers. You said that.
Yeah, I did. That's what I felt.
You were angry.
No, you can't paint me out as angry. I was in a position where I had to be controlled, of control professionalism. I wasn't angry because I stayed
You
on the curb.
object as non-responsive.
Well, I'm objecting.
Overruled. Overruled.
Answer will stand.
Next question.
Thank you. You started calling them names.
Yeah,
Yes?
you heard that. Yeah, you heard the
Right?
video.
You called him a tough guy, right?
You watched the video.
You call him a real man, right?
You watched the video.
Okay.
You do have to answer the question yes or no based on what he's asking.
I'm going to ask you that again, so your answers should be yes or no, okay?
Yes,
You called him a tough guy.
I did.
You called him a real man.
I did.
You called him such a man.
I did.
You called him bogus.
I did.
You called him a bum at least 13 times.
That's what you counted in the video?
That's what I counted.
And that's what you got, 13.
And that was early on, right? Those terms grew more and more angry. Would you agree with that?
They grew more and more pleading for life.
All right. After you called him a bum 13 times, you called him a fucking bum.
That's what you heard?
Did you say that?
Is that what you heard?
I'm asking you, sir.
I'm pretty
Did
sure
you
I
say
did.
that?
You heard that. I'm pretty sure you did.
You call him a fucking pussy ass bitch.
If that's what you heard, I'm sure that's what
I'm
I did.
asking you, did you say that?
If that's what the video recorded, that's what I did.
You called him a bitch.
If that's the video you heard from the video,
It's
that's
a
what I
yes or
did.
no, sir.
If that's what was heard on the video, yes, I did.
And at one point, you said that Officer Tao pushed you.
That's correct. He didn't. He put his hand in my chest, is what I said.
And you observed Officer Tao push someone else, right? Or feel like he pushed someone else.
I didn't let him touch anyone else.
Do you recall saying, "I dare you to touch me like that. I swear I'll slap the fuck out of both of you"?
Yeah, I did. I meant it.
So again, sir, it's fair to say that you grew angrier and angrier.
No, I grew professional, and I stayed in my body. You can't paint me out to be angry.
You were not standing, you were walking around, right?
Correct. Patrol.
And at times, you would go forward towards where Officer Chauvin was, right?
Correct.
And at times, you'd walk to the side, correct?
Well, I didn't really get too close to Officer Chauvin, actually. Tao did not allow me to get all close to Officer Chauvin.
You
So,
attempted to walk closer
I stepped off the curb and I stepped back on the curb.
because Officer Tao didn't permit you to go forward.
He said, step back on the curb.
Your voice, right? You weren't just saying you're a bum. Would you agree with that?
You said I wasn't just saying.
Right.
He was
The
a bum.
tone of your voice.
Tone of my voice was loud so people could hear me,
And it grew louder and louder.
so I could be heard.
And after Mr. Floyd was taken by the ambulance, you continued to interact with Officer Tao as well as other people on the scene, correct?
That's correct. After they retreated, I know they had to retreat. I said what I said. I know they can say more to me.
And you continued to yell these types of things after Mr. Floyd was gone, right?
Me and Mr. Tao had words back and forth. Correct.
And I think you said something about hoping he would shoot himself.
No, I didn't say I hope he's going to shoot himself. I said within the next 2 years, you will shoot yourself in your head for what you did. I didn't say hope. I don't hope death on anyone. The Bible doesn't allow that.
So again, you continued to engage with these officers, right?
Tao,
And your voice was loud, right?
yeah, he tried to intimidate me, so
The officers, most of the officers were on the other side of 38th Street.
me and Tao was standing in front of each other.
At one point, Officer Tao goes across the street as well, right?
They both had to retreat, correct.
And you continued to yell these same types of things.
Probably would. Correct, yeah. Wasn't being heard.
And it was over and over and over and over again, right?
Because I wasn't being heard.
It's a yes or no question, sir. Was it over and over and over again?
Yes, because I wasn't being heard.
Thank you, sir. I have no further questions.
Any redirect?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Williams. I have a few more questions for you.
Yes, sir.
In MMA fighting, do you ever have a situation where your opponent is handcuffed behind the back?
Never.
Do you ever have a situation in MMA where there are three people fighting against one?
Never.
And when you were on the scene at 38th in Chicago on May 25th of last year, when you were watching this interaction between these four Minneapolis police officers and Mr. Floyd, were you watching a cage match at the time?
Well, I only seen two of them, the animals. So I was watching more of a humane shit show.
Okay.
Objection, Your Honor. Sustained.
And
Sorry about what you said.
That's okay.
Okay.
so you weren't watching a sport that day, were you?
Not at all.
Mr. Nelson asked you a couple times about this kind of blood choke around the throat. Are you, based on your training, your experience doing this yourself, can you apply a blood choke to one side of the neck?
Correct.
And is that done in mixed martial arts?
That is done. Correct.
So whether Mr. Nelson wants to ask you about doing it on both sides of the neck, you've seen it done on one side of the neck.
Correct.
All right. And when you were on the street there at 38th in Chicago on May 25th of last year, watching Mr. Chauvin and Mr. Floyd, was it that kind of blood choke you thought you were seeing on one side of the neck?
Objection, leading.
That is correct.
Overruled.
Mr. Nelson asked you about seeing times when somebody has been unconscious in a mixed martial arts fight and come to and try to wrestle again or fight again. When an opponent is rendered unconscious through something like a chokehold in a mixed martial arts fight, is the fight stopped?
Right away. Immediately. Medical attention. Right away.
Mr. Nelson asked you about dealing with crowds that are upset in your experience as a security guard. When you're dealing with a crowd that is upset, are there ways to try and de-escalate the situation without using force?
That is correct.
Like what kinds of things can you do?
Really staying calm, being humane, talking to the person, trying to talk them down, just getting the person away from the situation, just being humane with the person. What worked for me in downtown Minneapolis as a security guard and with drunk people that I'm babysitting pretty much. Like I have to come to and try to figure out a way how to solve this problem without putting physical force to them unless they are trying to physically enforce on me.
So while you were on the street there on 38th in Chicago on May 25th of last year and watching Mr. Chauvin hold Mr. Floyd down, did you see Officer Tao try to de-escalate that situation at all with the crowd?
Objection, sustained.
Well, based on your training and experience as a security guard and your testimony just now about ways to de-escalate the situation, did you see Tao doing anything like that while you were there on that scene?
Same objection.
Sustained. Sidebar. Mr. Frank?
When you're dealing with a crowd as a security guard,
Overruled, he hasn't finished the question.
and you have, as Mr. Nelson described them, a crowd that's upset, would it help in your situation as a security guard to have other security guards present?
Yes, it does. More presence, the better.
Move on, Mr. Frank.
During your cross-examination, you were asked about the time that Officer Tao touched you, put his hand on your chest.
Correct.
And your reaction was what?
Immediately swiped his hand because I felt threatened, and then I stepped back and I put my hands forward, and I really was threatened by his presence. So again, I put my hands up, didn't know what else was going to move forward, and I proceeded to step back.
So,
I know you backed up to demonstrate, but if you could move back up.
Oh,
to the
sorry, yep.
microphone. Oh, no problem. I think we heard you, so you're fine.
just got to stay close to the microphone. So you didn't want Officer Tao touching you,
Not at all.
and other than pushing his hand away, you didn't touch him.
Not at all. We kind of just,
And then you went back up on the curb.
that's correct.
During your cross-examination, you used the term the officer's retreat.
Correct.
What did you mean by that retreat?
What I mean is I'm not a law enforcement or by any means, but I know I see when certain cases happen, when it comes to certain things like this, most of the officers retreat away from the scene until all the right authorities come on scene to take care of everything. And that's what I noticed that they did. They retreated away from the scene to the other side of the street, and that's where they stayed until whoever came and dealt with them.
Okay. Also, during your cross-examination, Mr. Nelson asked you about things that happened before you got to the scene.
That's correct.
You weren't at all trying to tell the jury in your previous testimony that you knew things that occurred before you got there.
Nah, not at all. I was deer in the headlights.
But when you got there, for that time period after you arrived and saw Mr. Chauvin with his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck on the ground there, until the ambulance took him, you watched that entire time.
I watched. Yeah, I watched everything.
And so during that time that you were watching, did you see anything that you thought justified holding Mr. Floyd down that way?
No, at all.
Answer is stricken.
Did you see Mr. Floyd fighting back to the officers?
No,
Did you see whether Mr. Floyd lost consciousness while you were there watching?
correct.
Your Honor,
Yeah. No argument on objections. I'll ask for sidebar if I want objection, or if I want argument. The objection is overruled. You may proceed. Ask the question again so Mr. Williams knows what it is.
while you were there watching, was there a time when you saw Mr. Floyd lose consciousness?
That is correct. We refer to fish.
That's,
Yeah.
you were asked multiple times about being angry
That's correct.
and more upset as time went on.
Correct.
So why? Why did you get angry and more upset as time went on?
Because again, they were not listening to anything that I was telling them. I felt like I had to speak out for Floyd because he was speaking out to the officer, and there was no feedback, no emotion, no nothing. Like I literally looked in his eyes and had, as I'm talking to
What,
him.
I'll just
Yeah.
stop you there.
We're gonna stop the answer there. Next question.
What did you think was happening to Mr. Floyd?
He was under distress.
That answer will stand, but move on from that.
You felt he was in danger?
Correct.
In danger of what?
Objection, Your Honor.
Council sidebar. Mr. Frey.
So, Mr. Williams, why did you think it was so important that you were not being heard?
Because I felt like with the side choke, he lose consciousness, and I felt like he was in the process of losing consciousness, also from the condition of my fish in the bag.
So,
Is it overruled?
you can continue.
So, like I said before earlier, he reminded me of my fish in the bag.
So let me ask it this way then.
The last no will be stricken about the fish in the bag.
And so then, I'm sorry, Your Honor. So you were concerned about Mr. Floyd losing his life?
Correct.
I have nothing further, Your Honor.
Any recross?
Very brief, Your Honor. You were asked a series of questions on redirect about your experience in mixed martial arts, if you recall.
Correct.
Can you tell me about any of the conversations that you had as you were being rendered unconscious in any of your fights?
Your Honor, I'm going to object. You're saying.
What did you just ask me?
What do you do? Just wait. Let me rule on the objection first. The objection is overruled. You may answer if you have a recollection as to any time. Ask the question again, but don't answer until I say so.
When you were engaged in mixed martial arts, in your fights, in your competitive fights, can you tell me, were you able to have a conversation with your opponent as you were being rendered unconscious? Yes or no?
We don't talk to each other, so no.
Nothing further.
All Any further?
Yes, Your Honor. You said earlier you're not a medical doctor.
That's totally correct.
If Mr. Nelson is asking you whether a person can,
Objection, Your Honor.
Stop. You're not allowed to give a medical opinion. Mr. Frank is going to ask you about your personal experience. If you have such a personal experience, you can talk about your personal experience. Nothing more. Mr. Frank, please phrase it in terms of his personal experience, not an opinion.
I will, Your Honor. In a mixed martial arts fight, when you are being rendered unconscious in a chokehold, you tap out, correct?
Correct.
And that's to prevent it from going too far.
Correct, losing conscious.
And the tap out is the communication you use to your opponent to say, hey, let up.
That is correct.
And your opponent has to follow that communication.
That's correct.
That's the rules of the fight.
That's the rules of the fight.
And so when you tap out, they know it's done and it stops.
Correct. And only time you can verbally.
That's an answer to the question. Anything
I have nothing further, Your Honor.
any further read? Thank you.
Mr. Williams, you are excused. Thank you. All right. Members of the jury, our next four witnesses are going to be persons who, because of their age, I am allowing them not to be on the video broadcast. Obviously, you will be able to see them in the courthouse. But just so you know what is going out beyond this courtroom, their video will not be shown. Further, when they give their name and spell their names for the record, that will be off the audio that is being broadcast outside this courtroom. Just so you know what the general public is seeing, you will, of course, see and hear everything. I'm also allowing, contrary to what is often in the rules of decorum that we operate under, that they can refer to other people who are at the scene by their first names, as opposed to Mr. or Ms. So that's with court permission. They're not violating anything by doing so. So with that, the state will be bringing in its next witness. There will be four in a row, probably. We're not going to get to all of them before we take a break, probably one at most. Okay, thank you. Okay. Five minutes? Okay. Well, why don't we just take our morning break for now, and if we have to take another one, we can do that as well. Let's break for 20 minutes. We'll be back at... Okay. Change of plan. All right. We're ready to go with our first witness. sounds like you've got a nice loud voice that we'll be able to hear you with the microphone. If there's any problem, I'll maybe move you up or back, but it seems like you're doing just fine. So I'm gonna turn it over, going back on audio, to Mr. Blackwell.
Good morning, Darnell.
Good morning.
Are you a little nervous up there?
Yes.
It's understandable. I'm just going to take a few minutes this morning to talk with you and give the jury a chance to hear from you about what you saw, how you reacted, and what happened on May 25th, okay?
Yes.
First of all, Darnella, would you tell us how old you are?
I'm 18 years old.
And 1 week ago, were you 18 years old?
No.
So you just had a birthday.
Yes.
And so when we talk about May 25th of last year, you were?
17.
Are you a student?
Yes.
Tell us, where do you go to? Are you in high school?
Yes.
Where do you go to high school?
9th through 11th, I went to Roosevelt High School. Then made the decision to switch to Augsburg Fairview Academy for my 12th grade year.
Okay. So you most certainly remember the date of May 25th of last year.
Yes.
I want to take you to a certain time period on May 25th at around 7 o'clock p.m. on May 25th. Do you recall walking to Cup Foods?
Yes.
And were you by yourself?
No.
Were you walking with a cousin of yours?
Yes.
Do you recall how old your cousin was?
Maybe 12, I'm not sure.
Yeah. Maybe 9?
Maybe.
Now you're walking to Cup Foods. Where were you walking from?
Home.
So you live nearby.
Yes.
Would you describe Cup Foods as the neighborhood store?
Yes.
Now the jury may have heard something about this being a dangerous neighborhood. Were you concerned for your safety in walking with your cousin to Cup Foods?
No.
If you had to estimate, how many times would you say you walked to Cup Foods from your home in the neighborhood?
Hundreds to maybe even thousands.
So you and your cousin walk into Cup Foods. What were you going there for? Do you remember?
I was taking her to get some snacks.
Your cousin loves snacks.
Yes.
So let's go to May 25th of 2020, and I want to show you a couple of things just to set the scene for our discussion. I want to show you what's been marked for identification purposes, for our purposes, as Exhibit 13. Your Honor, I think I need a handler. Okay, I got one. Now, in Exhibit 13, do you see two people in that, in what is a photograph?
Yes, but I also see two people back there, if that
Oh, I see.
counts.
Right, you see two people in the front of the photo and two people in the back.
Yes.
Is this photo a true and accurate depiction of you and your cousin in the
Yes.
front of the photograph on May 25th?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'll offer Exhibit 13 into evidence.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
13 is received. Would you like me to publish?
Yes, Your Honor, thank you. All right, now the jury can see it too. Now, this is a screen that you can actually mark on. And so if we see the two people that are right here in the front of this picture, there's a little girl with the word love on her sweatshirt, and there's another person next to her. One of those persons you?
Yes.
And which one, the bigger one or the little one?
The bigger one.
And this is your cousin next to you.
Yes.
And is this as you walk into to Cup Foods?
Yes.
I want to show you what we've marked as Exhibit 16 for the trial. If you could pull that up, Brad. Now, is this a video that you've seen before?
Yes.
Do you have personal knowledge of the scene that's depicted in this exhibit?
Yes.
Is this video a true and accurate depiction of the scene as you saw it on May 25th of 2020?
Yes.
Your Honor, the state offers Exhibit 16 in that.
Any objection?
16 is received.
So, Mr. Eltiste, if you could play this a little ways, I want to ask you some questions about it. So we can see with the jury, two people walking from the left to the right. There's a little girl in a green shirt, and there you are. Do you see you?
Yes.
And is this as you all were approaching Cup Foods on May 25th?
Yes.
Now, see there, your cousin goes into the store. Why did she go into the store and then you turned around and then came back toward the squad cars?
I wanted to make sure she got in.
You can stop there, Brad, for a second. When you walked past the squad car there, did you see anything happening there on the ground as you were walking towards Cup Foods with your cousin?
Yes. I see a man on the ground and I see a cop kneeling down on him.
Was there anything about the scene that you didn't want your cousin to see?
Yes.
And what was that?
A man terrified, scared, begging for his life.
Is that why you directed your cousin to going into Cup Foods?
Yes.
And then when you saw what was happening there at the scene, what was it about the scene that caused you to come back?
It wasn't right. He was suffering. He was in pain.
Let me stop you there for just a second, Darnell. And so when you say, first of all, he, are you referring to the person you come to know as George Floyd?
Yes.
Did you know anything about Mr. George Floyd before May 25th?
No.
Had you ever met him before?
No.
Ever seen him before, to your knowledge?
No.
So when you came back to this scene here that we can see in Exhibit 16, what did you do when you first got there and we see where you're standing? What did you do?
I pulled out my phone.
And what were you doing in pulling out your phone?
Recording and capturing what I was seeing.
And we have already admitted into evidence in this case the video which you had done, which was our Exhibit 15 that's in evidence. So tell the jury what you observed, what you heard when you stopped to look at what was happening there at the scene.
I heard George Floyd saying, I can't breathe, please get off of me. I can't breathe. He cried for his mom. He was in pain. It seemed like he knew. It seemed like he knew it was over for him. He was terrified. He was suffering. This was a cry for help. Definitely.
Yeah. You will disregard any opinions about how Mr. Floyd was feeling, but you can rely on her observations.
To the extent that you deem appropriate.
Mr. Blackwell.
Thank you, Your Honor. Donald, let me show you for a moment. We'll come back to this discussion. Let me show you Exhibit 17. That is also already in evidence. So can you see the person depicted on Exhibit 17? Darnella, are you able to tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury if you know who this man is? You can take your time.
Yes.
Please tell the ladies and gentlemen, who is this?
This was the officer that was kneeling on George Floyd's neck.
On May 25th?
Yes.
Is this the way he appeared when you saw him on May 25th, kneeling on George Floyd's neck?
Yes.
When you first arrived at the scene, you can take that down, Brett. When you first arrived at the scene and you started recording with your phone camera, were there other bystanders or others there present at the time?
No,
About how long before other people started to gather with you?
not even a minute in.
And could you estimate roughly how many others were just there around you who were also observing what was happening?
Maybe about 12, 14, something around that maybe.
If I showed you a picture of those who were there, might you recognize those who might have been present with you? Let's see. Brady, pull up Exhibit 184.
For the record, that's not been introduced.
Is being used to
Refresh memory, is that correct?
Yes, John, just one moment. Let me make sure it's just that only that she can see it.
I've already got it.
All right, thank you, Judge. As you look at Exhibit 184, do these look like in this exhibit the other bystanders who were with you at the scene on May 25th?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'll offer 184 now.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
184 is received.
So looking at this picture, photograph at 184, can you identify for us any of the other bystanders? We know that you identify your cousin to the right. How about any of the people, others here in the photograph?
This is a former friend. This is a friend I went to school with, Alyssa.
Would you just point her out so that you can mark on the screen actually?
Right there.
Exactly.
I'm sorry. Your Honor.
The arrow was on
I'm sorry, Judge. Could you repeat that?
The arrow is on the screen.
The arrow's on
Where
the
she
screen.
pointed.
the far left.
Yeah, just one moment, Your Honor. Is she able to mark from where she is?
She did. She put the arrow.
She put the arrow on the screen to
Okay.
mark where her friend is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
You see the arrow, Mr. Blackwell?
Yeah, no, I can't see anything on the screen here at all. either. Yeah, all right. You mentioned there's another one of your friends in the picture,
Yes.
and what was the friend's name?
Alyssa.
And could you again point out Alyssa? Okay, now I see it. Thank you, Adam. And what about any other persons you know here?
Not on the scene, but I do know people that was there at the last minute. I know some of the workers because I've lived there for a while.
But you were there the whole time as these various group of bystanders gathered together on May 25th.
Yes.
If somebody were to tell the ladies and gentlemen of this jury that you and the rest of the bystanders who were there were an unruly crowd or mob, I didn't finish the question yet. Hypothetical.
I don't think it can be non-leading.
So let's rephrase as a non-leading question, please.
All right. I want you to describe the nature and character of the persons gathered together there. Would you describe yourselves as an unruly mob or an unruly crowd?
Sustain. Now, overruled. I think that's the only way to get an answer is
However, I would like to cite
right after this answer. Go ahead.
No, I would say everyone were reacting multiple different ways from what they were seeing, which it wasn't right. We all know it wasn't right.
The last part of the answer is stricken. I'd like a sidebar with counsel.
Yes, sir.
All right. Sorry, the technical difficulties are sending shooting pains into all of our ears.
Yes.
Mr. Blackwell, if you would.
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you. So as you were there with the other bystanders, did any of these bystanders ever threaten the police?
No,
Did any of them ever physically get violent with the police?
no,
Did you at the scene on May 25th see any violence at the scene at all anywhere?
yes, from the cops, from Chauvin and from Officer Tao. I think that's his name.
Other than the violence you saw from Mr. Chauvin and the other police, did you see any act of violence from the bystanders who were there?
No,
Did you see any of the bystanders that act in any way that you would describe as unruly?
no,
Do you think it's fair to call them a mob?
no,
Amongst the bystanders who were there, did you see any of them make an effort to actually offer care for Mr. Floyd?
physically.
Yes.
I heard them say, "Get off of him. You're hurting him. He can't breathe. He's not moving." But anytime someone tried to get close, they were defensive, so we couldn't even get close.
So first, let's just stick with what you heard the bystanders. The bystanders were saying things to Mr. Chauvin.
Yes.
What things did you hear that were being said to Mr. Chauvin by the bystanders?
You're hurting him. Are you enjoying this? He can't breathe. He's not moving. His nose is bleeding. You're a bum. Pretty much words around that category.
And when you arrived at the scene, can you describe for us, first of all, what was the position of Mr. Floyd when you arrived at this scene and saw him by the squad car?
He was laid down on the ground, restrained. It didn't look like he could move much, but his head.
And by restrained, was he in handcuffs?
Yes.
By restrained, where was Mr. Chauvin in relation to Mr. Floyd?
His knee was kneeling on his neck. It was two other officers holding him down as well.
And what did you hear or see Mr. Floyd doing while he was being restrained underneath, as you described, the knee of Mr. Chauvin?
He was he was stating that he was in pain. He said his neck, his back, everything hurts. I can't breathe. Mom, he said, I would get up if I could, something around that. I wouldn't say that's his exact words. But yeah, pretty much he was saying how much in pain he was. He couldn't breathe.
At some point, was there a person who came to the scene who identified herself as a firefighter?
Yes.
Are you able to see her in this exhibit 184?
Yes.
Could you point to her? Okay, and let the record reflect she's pointed to Genevieve Hanson.
As far as the name, she's identified who she believes is the firefighter.
She had testified that. So,
The record will reflect that the witness has identified the person dressed in black, holding up a phone with a white headband in exhibit 184.
when this person who identified herself as a firefighter came, what did she do?
She asked them to check his pulse.
Who did she ask to check?
Chauvin.
And she asked Officer Chauvin to check the pulse of Mr. Floyd.
Yes.
Then what happened?
He remained kneeling on his neck. And she asked multiple times, not just once.
Then what did she do? Did she try to check his pulse?
No, they wouldn't even let us get close.
And what prevented your getting close when you say they wouldn't let us get close?
they were quick to pull out mace.
Who pulled out mace?
Officer Tao and Chauvin. He put his hand on his mace. They put their hand on their mace. I can't remember if they actually pointed at us, but they definitely put their hand on the mace, and we all back.
Did you feel threatened by the police officers?
Yes,
Did you feel threatened by Mr. Chauvin?
yes.
Why is that?
He seemed like, how do I word this? I felt like I was in danger when he did that. It rubbed me the wrong way. I didn't understand why they would do that, what we did for them to make them do that. That's why I felt threatened. I don't understand why the mace was even needed at all.
So as you were observing Mr. Floyd under the knee of Mr. Chauvin, did you ever see Mr. Chauvin do anything to offer care to Mr. Floyd?
No,
Did he ever either let up or get up so that he could breathe?
no,
Did you ever see him try to administer CPR?
no,
Did you see him call anyone else to administer aid to Mr. Floyd?
no,
Did he call out and ask if anybody amongst the bystanders knew CPR who might be able to help him?
not at all.
At what point did you see, well, let me ask this. Did an ambulance at some point arrive at the scene?
Yes,
And you saw the ambulance arrive there?
yes.
Roughly how many minutes after you first started watching what was happening to Mr. Floyd did the ambulance show up?
The end of my video, the video was about 10 minutes. I would say maybe somewhere around 9. I'm not sure.
So was there any point in your video, whether it's 9 or 10 minutes, that Mr. Chauvin ever let up or got up off of the neck of Mr. Floyd that you saw?
No, if anything, he actually was kneeling harder. It looked like he was shoving his knee in his neck. Like he was, yeah.
So was it your experience then, as the bystanders cried out, that Mr. Chauvin kneeled in even harder? Is that what you're saying?
Can you rephrase that?
You told us that it looked like Mr. Chauvin was kneeling in even harder on
Yes.
Mr. Floyd. Was there anything that was in response to that he was kneeling harder?
I feel like he was feeding off of our energy.
Calls for speculation.
I want to know.
Counsel, should we take our morning break at this time?
Yes, sir.
All right. Members of the jury, we're going to break until 11:15. We're in recess.